Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Project Pro AI Monetization Podcast. I'm Vinny, the co-founder of Project Pro. In this podcast, we speak with AI leaders on what business outcomes they are seeing with AI. Today, we are completely honored to have Bratin Saha with us. Bratin has spent his career growing multiple billion-dollar businesses that is kind of supporting the AI revolution today. He's currently the Chief Product and Technology Officer at DigitalOcean, where he leads product strategy, development, infrastructure, among many other things. Previously, Bratin was the Vice President and General Manager at Amazon, focused on AI, ML, and data infrastructure. Here, he built some of the fastest growing businesses inside of Amazon's history, including Amazon SageMaker, Amazon Q, and Amazon Bedrock. Previously, Bratin was a vice president at NVIDIA, where he led all software infrastructure for all product lines. And previous to that, he spent about 15 years at Intel as a senior director of software development. Bratin also has 100 plus patents and has co-authored 30 plus papers in these areas. Bratin, thank you for taking time to do this.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Really looking forward to the conversation.
Okay. So Bratin, one of the things we're curious about is you've had kind of a front row seat in building some legendary products like SageMaker, Q, and Bedrock. What is it like being in one of those rooms, making the decision on we have to do this? What is that like? What kind of discussions happen?
I think it starts with first understanding the customer pain point. A lot of this is really based on, talking to customers, understanding the pain points, what is it they're trying to get done, and why are the needs currently not being met. And then there is a lot of iteration. Like you start with an initial version at Amazon, we used to call it a PRFAQ. Here at DigitalOcean, we've also taken that practice. We call it a PRFAQ. And just writing down in gory detail, here is the pain points. Here is how we can solve them in a unique and differentiated way. And then when you do that, then you get feedback from customers and say, okay, does this resonate with you? And then if the concept resonates with them, then you do an early implementation, and then you're doing, private betas with customers. And then there's a lot of iteration at that point because it's kind of hard to get it right. And then you launch the product, but products aren't perfect when they're launched. You kind of hit it 70% of the mark, 80% of the mark. And then you're just quickly iterating as quickly as you can on the feedback that they're giving you in terms of what is working well and what's not working well. So the key in here is really listening intently to customers and just observing kind of all the pain points that they may be having as you're getting familiar with the workflows and really understanding that and then figuring out how we can solve those. And the other thing is, you're not going to get all of it done at one shot. You have to be very iterative and be in a tight loop during the design, during the initial development, and then when you're getting this out.
Okay. Yeah, that's a pretty solid framework. And you spent almost 40% of your answer on customer, listening intently, observing pain points. Most of your answer was around that. If you could double click around that, some best practices on what does those mean in action in a customer session?
The first thing is you're just trying to say, okay, what are your top asks? What are your top friction points? Where are you spending most of your time? If you had a magic wand, what would you want to remove from your workflow, and really kind of understanding. So let's say when we talk about SageMaker, okay, you go in and you ask this question, say, today, and this is some of the early conversations today, it takes me 6 months to build a model and put it into production. And then the customer says, I wish, when they say 6 months, you then say, why should it take 6 months? Okay. Or even the customer tells you, I wish I could do it a lot faster. Then that's the hook that tells you, okay, what is preventing you from doing it faster? Well, because, I have this bespoke infrastructure and I develop it there, and then, I don't have a way to automate the deployment and so on and so forth. And then you just dig into that. Same with Bedrock. Okay, LLMs are great, but I don't need to want to build LLMs myself because I just want to be able to use it. And so then you ask, okay, what is the problem in just using it? Then they'll say, well, someone has to host it, someone has to get the performance right, someone has to get the utilization right, someone has to tell me which LLM to use, someone has to help me put together the guardrails, and so on and so forth. So then you start with that initial statement. In one case, it is, hey, it takes me so long to deploy and build models. Okay, why should it take so long? Like if you think of software development today, you write code and you deploy it and it's all instantaneous. And then you think about LLMs, and it's like, well, I wish I could use LLMs for my business use case. And then you hook on to that, and then you say, what is preventing you? Well, because it's expensive and hard to host LLM. Well, why is it hard to host LLM? Okay, now let's say I host LLM. Is that good enough? Well, no, but I used to have an LLM, and sometimes I may need to fine tune it, and sometimes I may need to put RAG into it. Okay, then how do we make that easier? Then they say, well, it's still pretty expensive if I had to do it. Well, then how do you optimize the models? Then you go in and say, sometimes it hallucinates and gives wrong answers. Okay, well, how do I put guardrails into it? So it's really onion peeling. You get that hook at the top, and then you're peeling the onion. And you won't get done peeling the onion just by talking to the customer. You get like 3-4 steps through, and then you implement it, and then you say, okay, let's now go in and deploy your workload. And then when they deploy, then you find another 4 things that you need to do. So then you do those 4 things, then you find another 5 things. So there's this constant process. At some point, you get to an MVP. You say, I think I've done enough that some customers at least will be able to use this. I haven't been able to do as much as I would want, and I haven't been able to make it as easy for as many customers as I want. But you reach that kind of tipping point at some point. And then once you reach that tipping point, then, you release it for wider use by customers. And then, you're just talking to them and listening and burning down features one by one.
You make it sound as if it's a logical flow of steps that you just need to go through. So one thing I'm curious about is from the moment you get the hook and you're going down this multiple, you can call it pivot points or steps, this thing, right? At each of those points, given your practically unlimited resources and things like that, you could take multiple directions at each of those decision points. How do you optimize for the highest probability decision at each? Is there a way you make those decisions?
So, the first thing is there is no infinite resources. You're always resource constrained. I think there is a combination of intuition, data, and customer feedback, right? I think the intuition comes in and says, there are these 4 options I have. You kind of you start with first collecting some data, which is, let's say you start off and say, I want to reduce the time from 6 months, and you're taking a goal, I'm going to reduce it by at least 3x, and I want to get it to 2 months. And so then you basically look at the data to see, okay, if I went route A, and you're doing some analysis because, you're never going to get perfect data. Okay. And you don't want to get into analysis paralysis. So you're doing some back of the envelope calculations to kind of get the ballpark. Okay. And the ballpark says, okay, I think, this one appears more likely, this one appears less likely. Then you try to get some customer verification. You go to them and say, this is how I'm thinking about it. Does it make sense? And you get some customer feedback. And then at the end, you have to rely on intuition, right? But here is the key thing. You'll often not get it right. And so to me, the most important part is the willingness to quickly experiment, have the right metrics in place, have the right feedback mechanism in place so you can quickly change.
Got it. Okay. Very helpful. And the key part of intuition, right? Is that a fuzzy, non-quantifiable thing that just there or not there? Or is there a way to say these 3 things constitute intuition?
That's an interesting question. I think intuition is a kind of, I would say it's a judgment call based on pattern matching with seeing something similar in the past.
Very well said.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you're making decisions, as you said, A, B, C. So kind of intuition is telling you which decision to make, which path, which fork to go after. And you really are pattern matching with what I think, it's kind of hard. I haven't thought of it, but I think the process that happens is you instinctively are pattern matching with some similar situations in the past. So, and then you're saying what worked, what didn't work, and trying to look at the similarities between the two.
Okay, makes sense. Solid. And when you go through this process, early customers and MVP, how do you think of PMF at scales like that? Or is that even a checkpoint?
How do you think of?
Just PMF, like product market fit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think that's a good one. So once you have looked at the customer pain point, and if you have a really good understanding of the customer pain point, I think the next thing that you're looking at is, the product that I'm launching, is it making a needle moving enough difference? Like, let's say if I go back to that example and it takes me 6 months and you come back and say, you know what, I'm going to do it in 5 months, 15 days. That's kind of okay, but is it going to be enough for someone to switch over to you? Now, 15 days can be a lot, but I think what you're really looking for is, can I make a needle moving change? Because when you're asking people, when you're bringing off a new thing, there are two ways. One is you're bringing in a new thing and it's seamless within the existing workflow. Then you go from 6 months to 5 months, 15 days. But if I don't have to change my workflow and I'm getting an acceleration, is one thing. But sometimes especially when, whether it was a SageMaker or Bedrock or Amazon Q or whatever, you're asking people to switch, to change. When you're asking people to change, you have to look at the switching cost. And if you have to motivate someone to do the switching, it cannot be an incremental move. It's got to be a needle moving change. So then you first start with, do I have a real pain point? Okay. Is it real? When I say real, is it something that if I solve it, it makes a meaningful difference to the customer in terms of increasing the velocity, reducing the cost, or, increasing their efficiency? Because if you're able to do that, then it's worth paying for. If you're not doing that, then it's not worth paying for, because ultimately you want to have a profitable product. Then you go in and say, okay, I'm doing something that benefits the customer, hence I think I'll be able to monetize it. Then you go and ask, am I making a needle moving enough change? Because if you're making a needle moving enough change, then they'll be willing to say, the cost of switching is big enough, right? Then you ask yourself the question, well, do enough customers have this problem? That is when you're looking at your addressable market. And then if you say, yes, enough customers have this problem, then that's kind of your TAM. But then you also have to get to your addressable market. And then you want to say, do I have a realistic way of reaching enough of the customers that have the problem, right? So if you're answering all of these, that is when you really have a product market fit. Now, I kind of also, if you look at the last part of what I said, that also kind of folds in the go-to-market part into the product market fit, because you can always say, look, I'm doing this and a lot of people have a problem and I got the product out. Maybe in theory, you have a product market fit because you have a product that actually solves a big problem for many customers. But if you don't have a way of reaching those customers, a distribution channel or whatever it is, then ultimately you're not going to get the results. So to me, that entire thing is not just that I got the product, but I actually know how to deploy it to customers. To me, that's the whole process that you have to go through.
Okay.
And very often, one of the reason I mentioned the last point is people often go in and say, let's go in and decide on the pain points and am I solving it enough? Am I solving it innovatively and so on? And they often actually don't consider the last part of, can I sell this product? And as you go into the last part, you have to double click on it and you have to say, so the way I look at it is a good product you have to build it, you have to market it, and you have to sell it. And you really have to think about the market and sell as part of the product planning process, right? Because if you don't know how to market it and if you cannot message the pain points in your solution well, you aren't going to catch attention.
Yeah.
And then if you don't have a go-to-market channel to actually reach the customers, you aren't going to be able to sell it. And if you don't get all of this going, you're not going to have a successful product. Okay. And too often I've seen, often I've seen people not articulate the pain point and not solve it in a way that adds a lot of value to the customer. But even when that happens, I've very often seen people not being able to do the back end of the process. And I can tell you that back end of the process is as hard and often harder as the front end, which is designing the product.
Right, makes sense. And also, I guess a lot of these marketing and sales decisions probably roll into the product design decisions by itself many times, right?
Oh, yeah. So if you look at a PRFAQ format that we use this at Amazon. Now I've brought it over here in DigitalOcean. You have like the press release has a heading. That heading has to be catchy. How do you make it catchy? How do you succinctly define your product, right? And then we have questions and FAQs and so on. So they are all part of the initial thing.
Okay. And
the very initial days is really about define the pain point, solve the pain point. And so one of the other things that I'll also say is there is the aspect around building the product. And then technically, you build a product and there's a demand for it and you have a product market fit. But I think an equally important part is not just that, it's also about, can you run a profitable business? Yeah. And what that means is if you have to run a profitable business, you need to have a durable differentiator, right? So that then comes to the next phase. So, the people often think about product design as the first part, which is, I know how to get to the pain point and solve it. I think there's a second part after that, which is I know how to market and sell it. And then there's a third part, which is I can build it profitably in a sustained manner because I have a durable differentiator. And honestly, good product design is about all three.
Yeah, very, very well said. Yeah. And since you mentioned the PRFAQ a couple of times, and we have all heard of the Amazon PRFAQ, what does it make you do that's non-obvious? Is it the act of sitting and writing it makes you think better? Or is it because you're doing customer backwards, more insights? Or like, what are some tangible things it actually achieves?
I think the writing culture forces a clarity in your thinking. Because when you are writing things down, a lot of the logical dissonance actually plays itself out. And, and that is why for key products, key strategy docs, key vision docs, I actually take the pen myself and I'll write it. Because in the process of writing, as you're putting things down, if the thing doesn't flow and the thing doesn't kind of line up, you will know it. Mm-hmm. And so I think the act of writing forces clarity and forces you to confront inconsistencies. Okay. Then I think is important. The second part is it forces you to get into real details. And that is really important when you're defining the pain point. Too often I've seen things when people will come in and say, okay, the pain point is, it takes, again, let's go back to that example. The pain point is, it is too hard to use an LLM. Okay, but that doesn't give me a product. And that doesn't tell me that I can build a product in a sustainably durable way. You really have to double click like 6 layers deep, very detailed. And you have to say today, when somebody wants to use an LLM, they first have to either get an open source model. So they have to go to a repository like Hugging Face and then download it and then host it themselves. Or they have to use a third-party provider and, they may not get the latency and they may not get the availability and it's very expensive. So you have to really jot down each of the steps that the customer is going through. And so then you say, here are the steps the customer is going to go through: step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, step 5. And then you look at the whole thing and you say, this is why it takes 6 months. This is why it's hard. This is why not everybody can do it. And then when you've written it down, then you go in and say, okay, how many of these 10 steps can I knock out? And then when you're written, you say, okay, out of these 10 steps, this one takes 3 days, this one takes 3 months, this one takes 2 days. And then you say, well, I'm going to knock things down. That is when you know, did I knock down 3 months out of the 6 months, or did I knock down 5 days out of the 6 months, right? So writing forces you to have that deep details that actually leads to a good articulation of the pain point. And then the other thing that it does is, on the durably differentiated side, it forces you to really ask yourself, do I have a durable differentiator? And now if you don't have a durable differentiator, you get something out. If you have speed is a really good durable differentiator, so you can just keep innovating faster, okay? But then that forces you to say, well, maybe I don't have a key IP here. Maybe I don't really have kind of a network effect here. Maybe I don't really have a cost advantage here. Maybe I don't really have, a customer or kind of partner angle here. The writing forces you to think through all this. And then you may finally conclude, look, maybe I don't have a lot of it here, but if I get this out quickly and if I can innovate quickly and stay ahead of the curve, speed can be a big durable differentiator. And then you pick up customers and then they give you feedback, and that's when you get through.
And is the PRFAQ a living document that's constantly updated with your learnings? Okay.
Yes.
Understood. Okay.
Yes.
And you have kind of been instrumental in putting out these AI ML platforms out there, and you've seen a lot of use cases in the industry with those. What are some of the AI or Gen AI use cases that you're most excited about?
I think within Gen AI, it's the number of different ways it's being used. It's still early, one thing, but the software development aspect, software development and deployment, that is seeing real production use. I think customer service is seeing real production use. But I think, we are starting to see use of, use it, all kinds of search. We have a customer at DigitalOcean, that Autonoma, that actually provides an IoT platform. So the customers log into their platform, and then when the operators or the technicians or others have problems, they look up manuals and go figure it out. And now using Gen AI on DigitalOcean to actually just make it easily searchable. You come in, you ask, say, this is the problem with my machinery, and out comes the answer. So all kinds of search are interesting. I think you're going to get into more of the agents space, where it's not just, you're not just doing kind of an interactive session, but it's acting on your behalf. That's going to get really important. That's going to lead to a lot of automation. I think we are starting to see a lot of the create the first draft of this or create the second draft of this. It's still kind of rough, but it's starting to get there. So just a whole variety of use cases.
And for example, in a industry like upskilling and education, right? It seems like, so the two biggest problems there are, personalization and engagement. And it seems like Gen AI is like primed to solve the personalization and customization problem really well. What do you think will be the impact there in something like education and skilling with AI?
I think with education, there's lots of opportunities there. First is, as you very correctly said, the personalization one. You can see, which students are at what point of the curve in terms of familiarity with the subject, and you can kind of give them different lessons, different assignments, and so on. You can see who is having difficulties, and you can give very personalized help, right? The second one, I think, is just making it easier to discover the kinds of information that you need to get something done. Like, I need to start this project, I need to do this research. As these agents come in, you'd probably be able to type in, like, we have all these papers on archive, right? If I need information, I have to go and search all those papers. You can imagine that, very soon we'll probably have an agent where you can go in and say, hey, grab the papers related to this topic. Like if I want to do something around drug discovery, right? You can say, hey, grab the papers in the last 5 years related to this particular molecule and summarize for me what the side effects were, right? That saves you an intense amount of work. So you're kind of making it possible for someone who may not have deep knowledge to understand what's going on, but summarizing the contents and making it possible for them to make decisions. Then I think you're also going to see cases where, if you think of many of these professions, like let's say tax, legal, you're drafting the first draft of a legal thing.
Yeah.
Even if you don't know all of the nuances, you can probably interactively work with Gen AI to help draft something for you. Okay. Or let's say, there are building codes. Even if you're not a complete expert, that agent can go in and do a search for you and say, here are the rules, and here is where, your particular design doesn't adhere to it. So I think within the education part, there is let's go figure out how we give personalized help. But then there's the other part, which is just shorten the time to research. And then there's the third part, which is bridge the gap to my knowledge by you doing all the research and telling me the information. So you can address it on each one of these vectors. And by the way, this is the other part, which is not related to necessarily directly to education, but it's still tangentially related, which is a lot of, especially if you think of software development, but in general, a lot of, let me start by using the software development analogy and then I'll generalize it. A lot of software dev could become or will become natural language driven, right? Now, imagine a world where today you have to go learn, whether it's Python or Java or Rust or Go or whatever, you have to go learn the language, you need a degree and so on. But many people know what they want. They just cannot translate it to a programming language. But if I can get the stuff done through English, and if it happens through English, it will also happen through a mother tongue after that, then literally everybody is a programmer. Right. What does that mean? Like you have really significantly reduced the barrier to generating programs, right? And then I am like personally, I'm not a great painter, but I may have ideas around what to paint. I could just convert that into, with these models, I can use natural language to images and so on. So where I'm going with this is people think in language. Like when I'm thinking and so on, people think in language. What we lacked today and what education and skilling is all about is how do you convert your thoughts that are in a particular language onto an output that is meaningful to someone. So if I'm a painter, the output is a painting that's meaningful to a viewer. If I'm a software developer, the output is a software program that's meaningful to a computer. That process of translating from your thoughts, which are in natural language, to a meaningful output, that is what a lot of training is today. And what Gen AI can do is really automate that translation. And then you're really opening up a huge world because you're going from your thoughts, you're just typing them into a Gen AI model to the output. And that can just open up insane amounts of opportunities.
Yeah, it's fascinating, that point you made. So does that mean that going forward, developers just won't need to learn JavaScript or React or whatever it is, and you really, so the teaching of those skills takes a dive, but then teaching something else, maybe prompt engineering, goes up.
I think there's an immediate thing, and then there is what's going to happen. I think the immediate space, you're going to see these as assistants. So it's not that it's completely taking away the completely taking away the need to program. You'll still have to architect and design, and some of the modules you'll have to write. You'll have to check the output of the program. Some of the output may be buggy. You'll have to go fix it. So you'll still need familiarity and expertise with these languages. What happens at the end? Well, you may not need to know those languages. By the way, it's no different than what's happening in computer science for a long time. When computer science started, you had to write everything in assembly, right? So you needed to know everything in zeros and ones, and before that in punch cards, but let's say zeros and ones. So you actually, and then from zeros and ones, which is the punch card, to assembly. So you actually, I still remember the days when I would have to take tight loops, and I would actually literally write them in assembly so that your register allocation was done well and the loops were tight, and you didn't have instructions that are superfluous, and you actually wrote the code in such a way that the instructions could be scheduled without pipeline holes, right? We have to do that way. Yeah. Then came a point when the high-level languages and the compilers became so good that you never had to do it anyway. So if you go back at that time, then, as somebody saw the compilers emerge, they might have been thinking, well, will we get to a point when we don't, and they did all the programming in assembly, then they're saying, do we get to a point where we don't have to do assembly? And, initially it didn't happen. You still had to write your inner loops in assembly because the tools weren't good enough. But now you've gotten to that point. So ultimately the progress happens where that higher level abstraction does the job that the lower level abstraction used to do. And so you started with punch cards, and that became assembly, and then you didn't have to do punch cards, and then you started with C, and you didn't have to do assembly, and then you started, in C, well, you can think, hey, do I not have to do free and malloc, right? And then you get to Java and these garbage collected languages, and they just went away. So that, to me, it's really just a continuation of human progress where you keep raising the level of abstraction. And so then it gets down to the number of people who could program in assembly versus the number of people who could program in C was probably 10 to 100x more. And now as you go higher up, it's 10 to 100x more. And so now as it gets to English, it's like everybody who knows English.
Right. So the current wave of abstraction is English.
I think that's where it's going. English or natural language. Look, if you can do it with English at some point, you'll also get to your own native language. And so, that's when you're going to get there.
Makes sense. Does that also mean companies wanting software products internally will just build 10x more internal SaaS solutions themselves rather than going and buying these things because it just becomes a lot more easier?
I think so. There are two parts to this. One is, and I actually say this to my teams a lot. Software development is a lot more than coding. If you look at some of the studies, they have shown that 80% of the cost of software development is post-coding, right? So I think the deployment, the testing, the value, the post-deployment maintenance and all that. So, Gen AI will slowly get there as well. But in the initial stages, even if you take care of the coding, those other parts will remain. And at some point, Amdahl's law will catch up with you. Like you got rid of the, you made the 20% really fast, but the 80% is still there. But, slowly they'll also get better. Like, it's going to be a continuous process. So I think what you will initially see is, yes, there will be more productivity in coding. And then you will see more productivity in the rest of the software development lifecycle. And then you have to ask yourself, well, will the bottleneck shift to design? Because, there's integration and all of that. So the bottleneck will shift there. And then, you'll probably get to a point where a lot of that is getting automated. Then you get to the point of design. Well, design needs a lot of creative thinking and reasoning and planning. These models probably aren't there yet. So, I think that's where the bottleneck remains. So if you look at the total software development lifecycle, I think initially the coding phases will get more productive, and then these other phases will slowly get over time. And that's the way it is going to go. I don't think it'll be one giant wave because, you're going to chip it up one by one, chip away at it one by one.
Okay, makes sense. And, in your journey, you've obviously taken people along with you in your journey, parts of teams. What are your best practices for hiring, managing, inspiring, getting deliverables, retaining teams?
So so let's start with the first part, hiring.
Mm-hmm.
I look upon it as, broadly speaking, you're looking at three traits. Okay. One is attitude, the other is aptitude, the other is domain knowledge. I've often seen people index on domain knowledge, like, is this person an expert? I index on attitude and, the aptitude part, like, can this person be trained to do the job? One of my mentors once told me, and it's a really good piece of advice that I live, that I think has served me well, is hire the person who will be the best, not the day you hire them, but 6 months later. Okay. And the other reason that this is so important in today's world is you may be a domain expert today, but if you don't have the ability to constantly pick up new things, you won't be the domain expert 6 months from now. So, of course, if you're doing quantum computing, then it's not easy to pick that up. You need a domain expert in those. But I'm saying, when I'm doing, parts that require deep ML science, you have to be a domain expert in those things, right? So you can't just pick it up overnight. But by and large, I think the leadership principles or how you work and all that is really important. Okay, as for me, when I'm looking to hire, then once I've hired, I look upon kind of three mottos in terms of leadership. It's winning, growing, and caring. Okay, winning with customers, growing our employees, and making them feel cared for. Okay, I think if you don't win, if you don't have business success, if you're not part of something big, it's hard to motivate people. So you need to articulate a good vision for why what you're doing is important, why it's needle moving, and why we are going to win. Like, here is the skills we have, and so on and so forth. Then I think it gets down to, people don't just come to do a job. They want to have a career. They want to grow. They want to grow new skills. Ultimately, they want to get promoted. And, they may want to go and get a better job in a different company, which is okay. Let's just train them to get better skills so they can get the dream job, right? So growth is important, and you have to put time into it and have a process for it. And then ultimately, you don't want a relationship to be transactional all the time. Like, as a leader, you have to make hard decisions. You make people unhappy. People have, there will be good days and bad days. You have to hold a high standard. You have to tell people when they're not performing. You have to do a lot of these things to get the desired outcomes. But at the fundamentally, people should know that you care for them as a human being. Like, you're not looking upon them as a robot. Their feelings, they have challenges. When they have challenges, they get the support they need. They get, to get the time off they need, and so on. So I think those three are the key things I have.
Okay, good. Winning, growing, and caring. And from the other end, what does somebody have to do to start a career as a software engineer and become Amazon VP and CTO? What does somebody have to keep in mind to go up that trajectory?
I think it's a combination. Look, there is luck involved in a lot of these, so I don't want to, I just get that, you get lucky breaks, and I'm just grateful for the lucky opportunities I got. Okay. And that manifests in various ways, getting lucky with breakthroughs, with mentors, with the right projects, with kind of things falling in place. So that part is certainly there. I think the other part is just being willing to tough it out, like having the grit and the resiliency, being able to go deep into a problem, and trying to understand the technology as much as possible. Okay. And then the final thing I would say is being able to work in teams. Like, if I look at SageMaker and Bedrock and Amazon Q, and I was also leading EMR and Glue and all of those data infrastructures. These were all big teams. So, ultimately the team had to work. And same with NVIDIA, was running all of the software infrastructure. That was a big team. Same at Intel, did a lot of work. Ultimately, it was all team. Like even if I go back to the first project that I did after I graduated, and this was at Intel, and this was working on simulators for Java. That itself had, like, it was a 4-person team, 4 of us working together, each one of us working on different portions, and the thing had to come together. So, being able to do that is important as well.
Got it. Luck, depth, working in a team, grit. Okay. Awesome. Finally, Bratin, I know you earlier mentioned, combination of intuition, data, and customer conversations to make those pivot point decisions. But broadly, do you have anything else to add to that on how you make decisions overall? How do you prioritize what needs to get done? Is there another angle to that?
I think there is certainly, in terms of priorities, there is certainly a business aspect to it. Like, where is the ROI and all that? That is certainly there. Getting a lot of feedback, it's customers and all that, get from team members, right? So getting a lot of input, getting a lot of data on what we can do. The hardest decisions, honestly, you then have to make a judgment call. The easiest decisions between the data and the customer anecdotes and the team feedback, you know what to do. The hardest ones, you don't. The hardest ones, I think some amount of intuition comes in.
Okay, great. On that note, Bratin, thank you so much. This has been incredibly insightful.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Really enjoyed talking to you.